Welcome to Yincast, our podcast for current and future leaders wanting to develop themselves further. Every month, the Alembic team discuss and share their thoughts on issues and topics that are common in the workplace.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Yincast. We've got all the usual people today. So we've got Matt, Roseanna.
Good morning, everyone.
And I'm Alice. So thank you for tuning in. The theme of this Yincast is motivation. So this month at Alembic, all our marketing is covering the theme of motivation. We personally have seen quite a significant uptake in our clients. They're wanting to map their own motivation and the motivation of their teams. So we thought it would be good to talk about this. Most people don't know what truly motivates them, but once it's understood, it has quite a few benefits, including an improved sense of purpose, enhanced self-awareness, and it can help to increase and better your performance and productivity. So we use something called motivational maps. Myself, Roseanna and Matt are all motivational map practitioners. And we use motivational maps with our clients and on ourselves because it helps us to gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and our colleagues. It's also a really useful tool to start the conversation around what really energizes us at work and maybe what doesn't so much. One thing that's important to note about motivation, as we know, it changes over time. So as a leader, it's important to know what motivates both yourself and your team. So we've actually at Alembic redone our motivational maps, and we've just been comparing our results to see if there's been any shifts in what motivates us and what doesn't. We were saying as well that big life or environment changes can impact what motivates us. I think, Matt, you were saying a bit about that, weren't you?
Yeah, I think motivation does change over time. I'm sure everybody's experienced that. And just with the passing of time, you'll see changes in your motivational profile on your map. But there are sort of big life events which obviously change your motivation. If I was to pull a few, obviously having kids comes to the front of my mind. It definitely changed my motivation. But there are other things like having a new partner, moving house, starting a new job. They can all be things which changes your level of motivation. Obviously, we've been talking about this a little bit in the context of the pandemic. So it's been touching on a few of those areas. So it's meant a change of job for people. It's meant a massive change of habits and lifestyle. And all these things touch on your different motivators. We've done a bit of remapping at Alembic, so we've all done our maps, and out of interest we decided to do some remapping given the focus on understanding motivation with some of our clients. And it has been interesting. I think most people have found that their motivations during the pandemic have changed. Alice, I think you were speaking to some observations. You've done quite a lot of maps recently, and you were noticing a change in Defender. Is that right?
Yeah. So the Defender motivator, for those that maybe don't know, is about being motivated by safety and stability. And that could be financial, or it could be, within your job, having job security. So as Matt said, I have seen personally in the clients that I've been mapping, quite a lot of them previously didn't have Defender as something that was very important to them in terms of motivation. But now that has become something that's really important to them. And I've seen that on my own map as well, actually. It's come into my top 3 motivators. whereas before it was my 6th motivator. So there's 9 motivators in motivational maps, and mine was 6th, and now it's moved up all the way to 3rd. And I think for me personally, that is mostly due to the pandemic. It's been a very turbulent time for people. So I think it's quite normal to crave that sense of security and safety. But equally, just quickly touching on my lower motivators, I've seen a bit of a shift there, but I think that's more due to being at Alembic now for almost 3 years. So when I first started at Alembic, it was right at the start of my career. And Spirit, which is about sort of freedom and independence, was my lowest motivator. But I've seen that move up a little bit as I've got more responsibility and more expertise. I think that's come up a bit more as well. So that's, for me, the sort of main notable shifts. What about you both?
I actually have noticed the exact opposite with my defender, which is really unusual. I think because of the pandemic everything being so up in the air, I think I've just taken my hands off the wheel and said, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Let's just roll the punches and see where things go. And it's in my profile, it's been the biggest mover amongst all of my motivators, and it's dropped to 2nd from bottom. Or I suspect that's why that's happened. Another mover in mine is friend, which is about building fulfilling relationships. I'd suggest that this is probably one of the motivators, along with defender, that you most often see movement with during the work we've done in the pandemic. And that's because people are finding it harder to manage their relationships, or they might be finding their relationships less fulfilling. Funnily enough, mine has dropped, whereas I'd expect it to have increased. It might perhaps be for the same reason as defender, that it's just been completely impossible to maintain fulfilling relationships in the same way we used to. And I've kind of adjusted and become more comfortable with that. I'd be really interested to see how this has changed again coming out of the pandemic, because I definitely feel like I'm craving fulfilling relationships again. What about you, Roseanna? How have yours shifted around?
It's really interesting actually just hearing you two talk, and actually hearing how actually your maps have shifted in very different ways. And I just really like this as a point to make about, as leaders and managers, it's sometimes really difficult to really understand that or know that without, maybe directly asking, but then that's also quite a difficult conversation. And as Alice was saying, these maps give you really nice language in a really open setting, non-judgmental. There's no right, there's no wrong, it's just different. And I think just hearing you two talk about the last 18 months and how they've changed in actually maybe different and opposing ways is really interesting. So we don't know until we start asking the questions. I think I would probably say the similar thing to Alice, and that I think leaders just want to have more of a touch point, know a little bit more about what's driving their employees, what's motivating them, so that they can bring out the best in their teams. And I think in remote working, it's harder to just get that sense. And I think that's really important to drive performance and capability, and help people with setting their own direction. I think motivation is a key part of all of that. My map hasn't changed that much. I think the only significant change has been friend. I think some listeners may know that I've moved, and so actually re-establishing work relationships, maybe thinking about different networks. I've moved from London to Leeds, so there's a different network there. And also it sort of challenged, how I'm connected with you guys in the team, and, that proximity and all those things. I think it's something that I was very conscious of when I was moving, that I wanted to maintain and not lose. So I think that's a significant shift in terms of that's elevated, that sort of come up a little bit more strongly. And as you were saying, Matt, I think that's quite normal, where you've sort of had an environmental shift. So you're just not seeing the same people, you're not part of the same communities, networks as you were before. So that seems to me quite a natural thing to have happened. But there hasn't been any other shift. And I think for me, I have a strong searcher and a strong spirit. And I think maybe the decision to relocate has actually been a bit of a motivating thing for me, with the backdrop of the last 18 months, of course, but it's actually provided quite a good focus for me. So it is interesting reflecting, and I agree, Matt, like, what's it going to be like, in a year's time, when maybe we're settled, we've got a new normal, whatever that is. But yeah, I think it just shows the dynamism of our lives, and what's driving us now might not drive us in 6 months, and it's important for leaders to know about that. And I think if you think about this as an organizational point, why do you really want to know? Okay, you want people to be motivated because they'll perform, you want to drive a culture of inclusion, but ultimately motivation gives a really good indicator of how people are making decisions, and there are an inherent conflicting ways that people make decisions. There are conflicting motivators. We're motivated by different things. How do we then work together and make a decision? That's all still really valuable as well. So I think there's lots of different insights you can pull. And I just think leaders at the moment are going, how do I access that? How do I answer these questions I have? And the map's a really nice way to do that.
I've absolutely found that to be the case. Leaders want to know what's going on with their teams, particularly given the more remote style of working. I think some leaders feel really disconnected. We've been doing lots of work on kind of cultural pieces, and I think that's speaking to the same thing. Culture has been harder to measure and manage. And I think you've made a very good point. It's so interesting how the three of us have spoken to 2 or 3 of the same motivators on our profiles that have done completely different things for different reasons. And even Roseanna and I, who share quite a few of our motivators and have both been through the same pandemic, and we've both moved away, have really experienced very different changes in motivation. And it's one of my favorite things about motivational maps, is it's such a good and structured and easy start point for those kind of conversations. Quite often you'll go through a mapping exercise with the team, and we generally do it in one-to-ones. You'll start conversations around motivation and their profile, and you'll end up talking about something which is related but completely different. It is a free license to talk about whatever you want. And we've had some really amazing and insightful conversations with people. And I think particularly during the pandemic, there's not necessarily been a structured outlet for people to talk about these things. And I found it really, really interesting. And also, I think it's been a really key part of how we've engaged with organizations remotely. It's formed a much larger part of our work than it has ever been before. And I think that's just really, everybody's feeling the same thing. They want to be able to connect with their team. They want to be able to have these more insightful conversations to try and build a high-performing team in a slightly different environment to what they had before.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think just following on from your point about high-performing teams, it's of course very important for leaders to know what motivates their team and those that they lead, but it's also really important for staff members and team members to know what motivates those that they work with, on a regular basis, in order to have conversations about what they need from each other, and how they can bounce off each other and use their motivators and strengths together to create the best outcome. It also helps to a degree to help to explain the people's language and behavior, because as Roseanna said, it's a great indication of, you know, why people are making the decisions they are making, and because they have most of the time they have their motivators in mind. So I think it's a great way, just following on from your point, to do that within teams as well and communicate that with each other, so we all have that insight and that understanding of each other. So just to quickly summarize the main points that we've spoken about today. So we've just given a short intro to motivation and motivational maps. We've talked a bit about how motivation changes over time due to a range of big life events, and how that can look very different for different people. Even though it's the same event, it can change their maps in different ways. We spoke about the importance of leaders knowing what motivates their team, and we encourage you to have those conversations with your team to get that greater understanding. And we also touched on the fact that motivation is a good indicator of how people and why people are making the decisions that they are.
Thank you for listening. If you go to our website, alembicstrategy.com, in the What We Do section, we now have a motivational maps page where you can find more information on how we use maps with our clients and the benefit of that. Feel free to get in touch if you want to talk to us about motivational maps and how you can make this work for your team. We're always happy to help. Also, keep an eye out for our upcoming articles from the Alembic team on motivation, and our next Strategy Cafe with Roseanna and guest Susanna Braid-Waring from Aspirin Business Solutions and Motivational Maps. You can sign up for this on our website, alembicstrategy.com, in the Get Involved section. We hope to see you online.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Yincast. We hope you enjoyed it. To get the heads up on future podcasts, you can sign up to our mailing list through our website, alembicstrategy.com, in the Get Involved section. If you enjoyed this, then you might also be interested in our other events. You can sign up to our newsletter for updates on our latest events and articles. Also, look out for Strategy Cafe, our regular leadership webinar, where Nick, our MD, interviews prominent leaders.